Hey Squishies, back again with another Steven Universe vlog. This is Season 3, Episode 2021, 22 and 23? I'm not sure. It's Bismuth, which, wow. Wow. I mean, there's a lot to talk about with this one. For starters, just wow. This was a tremendously impressive episode. Apparently this was like the 100th episode special. It comprises episodes 99 and 100. And they went all out. This episode is extremely well written, surprising, emotional on multiple levels, mostly thoughtful. I'll get into that. There's one area where it clearly wasn't thinking. Or if it was, it was not thinking correctly. Just, dealing with some of the heaviest themes that Steven Universe has done yet, and that's saying something. That really took advantage of the extra space that being a 22-minute episode allows. There have been a couple of past episodes where I felt, Alone at Sea comes up as a major example, where I felt that being 11 minutes long was a major constraint that was really limiting them. And because a story can be too big for 11 minutes while still not working as a two-parter, because it may not have a natural breaking point near the middle. This one I don't think does. I don't think there's a point near the middle of the episode where you can say, oh, well, there's the cliffhanger. Oh, well, there's the to-be-continued moment. Excuse me. But so I'm really glad that they chose to make this one 22 minutes, because it needs it and it deserves it. And I'm just going to start off with some of the I feel like unquestionably positive things about this episode. I love the way in which Bismuth's character is just immediately a positive force. She comes in and we see immediately how much Pearl and Garnet love her. I love the little ritual, and it was obviously a ritual, where Bismuth asks Pearl who owns you, and Pearl says nobody. I love the joshing between her and Garnet. I love in the Forge the way she's impressed by Amethyst's whip, and later when they're practicing compliments Amethyst's creativity, because after the last few episodes I think Amethyst really needs some positive reinforcement. And I don't see it as being from an extra diegetic perspective, yes, this is how Bismuth wins over the characters so that it can feel more like a betrayal later. But I think from a diegetic perspective, that's not what's happening at all. Bismuth is not setting them up. Bismuth is just being who Bismuth is. I feel like we get a really strong sense of who her character is almost immediately. This is someone who is fiercely loyal, passionate, but also playful, and really committed to the cause. Um, and great. Obviously, there's kind of a central moral dilemma here, introduced with the breaking point, which is, contrasted with Rose's sword. And I love Rose's sword, the reveal that it can't damage gens. It can only destroy their projected bodies. And that, at least the implication I got was that it's specifically designed to be super effective against gems' bodies, but not actually harm their actual gems, which is beautiful. It reminded me of one of my favorite D&D characters I ever played, which was a really high-level sword fighter who had spent a great deal of money getting his weapons enchanted so that they were still fully effective, swords and such, but could not kill. And yeah, that's what I see kind of with Rose's sword, and I love that concept because I think the idea of a very powerful character who deliberately restrains themselves in that regard, who could kill easily but chooses not to, is a very powerful one. The whole Superman doesn't kill thing. Some people are critical of that, with, well, his villains keep escaping. You hear this argument a lot with Batman, he should kill them because they escape over and over again. They're constantly, wrecking stuff. They hurt people. Lots of people get hurt. If he just killed the villain, none of those people would get hurt, so really it's on him. First of all, no. It's an error people make because they think in terms of villains and heroes. Because the villain is always going to hurt people. The villain's always going to hurt people. So just kill them because they're always going to hurt people. So there's no reason not to. But people are not heroes or villains. And people, can at any given point change. People are terrifyingly changeable. They will all of a sudden just decide one day to do things differently. Any given person doesn't do that very often, but if you look at, the whole world full of people, it's happening constantly. Somebody somewhere is doing something that would have seemed completely out of character the day before. At any given moment of any day, somebody somewhere is doing that. And so when you're talking about how to deal with people, you do have to take that into account. So there's that. There's also, I think, so one of the things I've had kind of going through my head lately, because there's a Steven Universe convention that just got kickstarted, and I'm thinking about submitting panels to them, and so I've been thinking about topics. And one of the things I've been thinking about is the degree to which Steven Universe, one of its major themes seems to be this idea that the best way I can phrase it is the radical embrace of the other. That rather than staying with our own kind, growth and enlightenment and change comes out of deliberately seeking out that which is different, that which we would instinctively reject, and embracing it in a way that doesn't require abandoning who we are, but allows us to grow. And obviously fusion is the most obvious example of that. Specifically the fusion between different types of gems. But there's other ways in which the theme works. And Bismuth's loyalty is to the point that it's a rejection of that. Because her loyalty is to the point of being a strong in-group preference. And this is one of the ways, there's been lots of studies on how people make moral decisions and the psychology behind politics and all that kind of thing. And one major predictor of where people will fall politically is this idea of in-group preference. People with a very strong in-group preference, and it doesn't matter what group it is, people with a strong tendency to in-group preference care much more about people who are part of their group than people who are not. And everybody's got some degree of in-group preference. We all care more about the people we share something with than the people we don't. And I think that's not only inevitable, but that's probably a good thing. I think somebody who doesn't care more about, say, their friends than they do about strangers can't really be said to have friends. Or at least would be a very bad friend. But a little goes a long way. And a very strong in-group preference leads to black and white thinking. It leads to the very puritanical strain of conservatism. It leads to bad stuff because it becomes this powerful rejection of the other. And I'm not saying that we have to be friends with people who have utterly abhorrent behaviors or views. I'm not saying that we have to tolerate bigots. We don't. In fact, we shouldn't. Because that's actually the worst thing you can do if you want to create a tolerant environment is to tolerate bigotry. Because then the bigots go and make the environment as intolerant as they want it to be, and you have no way of stopping them. But for Bismuth, the lines are very neat. There's crystal gems, and there's homeworld gems, and she cares entirely and only about the crystal gems, to the point that Rose caring at all about the homeworld gems, Rose saying, well, maybe we shouldn't murder them all, was enough for Bismuth to declare her a traitor. And frankly, it's a behavior that you see a lot in social justice circles. It's a behavior you see a lot everywhere, but it's very familiar to people in social justice circles. It's the left-wing circular firing squad, where people will very quickly turn on one another, where you spend more time attacking your allies than attacking your enemies. I've been guilty of it. We've all been guilty of it. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone in specific. But, it's very obvious that the people making Steven Universe have spent time in social justice circles. There's no way you make a show like that if you haven't. It is very clearly a show that's aware of social justice issues and addressing them. And so they have definitely encountered the phenomenon of the person who has the "you're either with us or against you" attitude. The person who expects, the person for whom any deviation from a strictly defined set of not only this is what social justice means and what it looks like, but this is how it has to be implemented and how we're going to achieve it, and any deviation from that is to be attacked as being part of the oppressor. Which, hey, guess what? That is a tool of the oppressor. That very attitude, that very infighting, is one of the most powerful opponents that people who care about justice have to overcome. The desire to separate people out into neat boxes. The desire to have an us and a them. And again, I'm not saying that you have to tolerate toxic behavior. Toxic behavior should be dealt with. I'm just saying that us versus them attitude, that complete, up until 10 seconds ago I thought we were allies, but you have failed at allyship on this one thing, and therefore you are the enemy forever. That's a problem. Not because you have to endlessly forgive people. Forgiveness is kind of bullshit. But from a purely pragmatic perspective, no two people have the same view of what morality and justice look like. No two people have the same experiences. No two people have the same priorities. Even if you and another person agree 100% on the issues, there's going to be somewhere where you prioritize them differently, because you're different people and you have different experiences. And that means at some point you're going to run into a choice of which of these do we address right now? Which of these goals do we temporarily table so that we can make progress on this other one? And you're going to disagree. And it's okay to disagree. It's okay to disagree strenuously. It's okay to fight each other. But you have to be able to turn around and work together on other things. Otherwise, all you end up is everyone pulling in different directions at once and nothing ever goes anywhere. And again, I'm not saying you have to agree with people you don't agree with. I'm not saying you have to work. I'm not saying you have to sacrifice your own principles. I'm saying at some point you're going to have to work with people on something you do agree with them about when you don't agree with them about other things. That is inevitable, and you have to be able to do it. Which kind of goes for both sides in this disagreement. Rosa's response was terrible. Not only, poofing Bismuth, but hiding that she'd done it. Hiding Bismuth's point of view, not allowing other people the choice to consider whether they agree with Rose or Bismuth. That's the same problem. That's the same, you have to do it my way, or not at all. You have to do it my way or you're the enemy. Now, based on the way her interaction with Steven goes, it seems very likely that Bismuth attacked Rose, and Rose poofed her in self-defense. But that doesn't justify then bubbling her and hiding her away for thousands of years and never telling anyone what happened. Because there has to be a way to talk to her. There has to be a way to come, if not to an agreement on this issue, at least to a way that they can work together toward a common cause. And I'm not saying, because I know I could be taken this way, I'm not actually saying that violence is never acceptable. Because the simple fact of the matter is, any change which takes power away from the powerful will be regarded by them as violence. They will feel it as violence. And so they will respond to it like violence. At the same time, there's direct violence and there's institutional violence. There's the form of violence that people are subjected to by the power structures in which they live. The violence of not being allowed clean water. The violence of having to live in fear. These are acts of violence. But they're acts of violence perpetrated not necessarily by specific individuals, but by the structures of society. That's still a form of violence. There's an old quote from Isaac Asimov, from one of the Foundation stories from the 50s, where he says that, or he has a character say that violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. I don't think that's true. I think violence is the last refuge of the powerless. Because, quite simply, the people who have power don't want to give it up. Which means the only way to get it away from them is to exert power over them. To make them give it up. How do you exert power over the people who have the power? They have the power. And the answer is that there's more than one kind of power. And while the powerful very likely have more power than you of every kind of power there is, violence is the cheapest, easiest to get your hands on form of power there is. And one of the hardest to stop. So if you have access to no other kind of power whatsoever, very often violence is still available to you in some form. Maybe not directly against the people who are in power, but you can still find ways to affect them negatively with it, which gives you a form of power over them. It's a small, limited, feeble form of power over them, but it's very often the only kind you can get. And that's just the reality of how life works. The only thing that can stop power is power. And sometimes violence is the only kind of power you've got. But that doesn't apply in this case, because the crystal gems do have other kinds of power. They've got the power of distance. They've been able to isolate the Earth from the gems, from the gem homeworld. They've been able to cut off the warp pads and so on. That's a form of power. They are able to use that to prevent the homeworld gems from interfering with life on Earth and forcing the crystal gems back under their control. They have non-lethal forms of violence. Rose's sword, it's a clear example there. Gems are hard to kill, which makes non-lethal violence a lot easier against them. Because things that would be incredibly lethal violence against any living thing on Earth are a temporary inconvenience to a gem. But hey, guess what? Being able to subject someone to temporary inconvenience is a form of power. For example, it's why voter ID laws are horribly unjust. Because even though it is, getting that ID is arguably a temporary inconvenience. In some cases, a very large inconvenience. If you live 50 miles from the nearest place where you can get an ID, and it costs a non-trivial amount of money to get there, to take off work, get to the place where you can get the ID, sit around waiting for the ID, process the ID. These all may require resources and so forth. I mean, for some places, for some people, that's insurmountable. That's more than a temporary inconvenience. But even for the people for whom it is just a temporary inconvenience, it's still an exertion of power over them. It's still an expression of saying, like, haha, look at through the extra hoops you have to jump. And it's going to prevent some people. For some people, it'll be that straw. For other people, it's more than a straw. The point is that that is still a form of power. And therefore can be used either in support of the existing power structures or as a means of toppling them. I mean, what is a protest? When protesters stop traffic or people go on strike and disrupt an industry, a lot of that is about using inconvenience as a form of power over people. And that's just the way it has to go. The other huge power that the crystal gems have is Stephen. Stephen is jaw-droppingly charismatic and persuasive. He is relentless and unstoppable and will make you his friend. That is very utopian, but it's still a form of power, and it's a power that Bismuth doesn't understand that they have. Which actually gives me some hope about the ending of the episode, because it is deeply unjust that Bismuth gets proofed and locked away. But Stephen comments in the course of the episode about how most gems usually start out by trying to kill him, and it takes him forever to make friends with them. I apologize if you can hear the dogs barking outside. I have to have the windows open because the heat is on in my building, and if I close the windows, it very rapidly gets way too hot in here. And while I don't have the heat running in my apartment, the entire rest of the building is super hot because that's the way the 90-year-olds who control our, building council owners thing like it. So sorry about that. Any other outside noises you hear in this or in the next couple months worth of videos, because I'm basically going to have my window open all winter because of how high they keep the heat in this building in the winter. There'll be days where it's going to be 30 degrees outside, and I'm going to have my window open because the alternative is for it to be 90 degrees in here. Where was I? Right, so there's a point where Stephen says that that other gems usually try to kill him, and it takes him forever to make friends with them. Well, that's exactly what happens in this episode. Bismuth tries to kill him, and he poofs her. But it's left hanging. He's still going to try to become friends with her. She's not staying in that bubble forever. And that's further supported by his decision to tell the other gems about her. Because Rose clearly just wanted to put her in a hole and forget about her. Stephen's not willing to do that. And I also think the expressions on the gems' faces as they put Bismuth in the like, holding thing, they're not happy with how this turned out either. This is not supposed to be, yay, we won. We defeated the evil Bismuth, who betrayed us. This is, damn it, this is the least fucked up way out of this we have been able to think of. Hopefully we can find some other way to do it in the future. Or some way of fixing this later. Which is a much better way to end it, I think. What else did I want to talk about this episode? There's an elephant in the room that I'm deliberately leaving for the end. I will get there. Oh, okay, so one of the things I noticed is that this season has been increasingly getting into, like, the idea that parents aren't perfect. We're seeing things like, I think that was this season, Sadie's mom. I know that Marty, being Onion's dad, was this season. There's, another example that I'm totally blanking on. There was Onion's dad, there was Sadie's mom, or Sour Cream's dad, Sadie's mom. I'm sure there was at least one other example of seriously suboptimal parenting in this season. And I think, like, thematically, we're looking at Steven's relationship with his mom, I think is going to be coming more into focus now, specifically the idea that Rose Quartz wasn't perfect. Because she's been presented as being kind of perfect for a lot of the series. But she wasn't. She can't have been. And this is the first case we see of where Rose Quartz did something very wrong. Because regardless of whether she was right or wrong to poof and bubble Bismuth, she was clearly and absolutely 100% wrong to lie to the other crystal gems about it. And Bismuth's speech to Steven about how he doesn't have to be his mom. He can be better. He can be him. That's unvarnished truth. He can be better than her because she wasn't perfect. And he won't be perfect either. But he can be something different and something new. He can be Steven. And that's really important. That he has that possibility. And already is making a choice differently, deliberately choosing something other than what Rose did, because he thinks it's better. Good. Yeah, I think that covers everything except the last thing. So let's talk about the last thing, which is that Bismuth is the most heavily black-coded character since Garnet. Or black-coded gem since Garnet. She's heavily coded as being a black woman. And specifically an African-American woman, where Garnet has the British accent, so she's not coded as being African-American. But the way Bismuth is presented as this very large and bulky figure ties in with the way black people are depicted in the media, the scary black man kind of thing, or the big black woman. The, kind of working class vibe she has, where she's a builder, she's someone who works with her hands, she's got tattoos, that, there's a lot of interaction and overlap between classism and racism in the US. So to code someone who has other elements coding them as being black, as being working class, strengthens that coding. Voice actress. I'm blanking on her name, but I recognized her voice from Orange is the New Black, which I've seen a few episodes of. So they have a black woman doing the voice acting. And of course, dreadlocks. The general shape of her face and the fact that she has a similar kind of nose to Garnet as opposed to Pearl. These are all tied together, you know. Her accent is kind of the like, I don't know where the voice actress is from, but it's what I think of as a Baltimore accent. And it's specifically a black people from Baltimore accent. Which is actually a black people from a lot of places accent. Because one of the results of the high levels of segregation we still have in the United States is that black people from cities where the white people have very different accents, the black people's accents are more similar. Like, black people from DC and Chicago have basically the same accent, where white people from DC and Chicago sound really different. And that's a result of hundreds of years of segregation. It's a really depressing fact. Which is not to say that one or the other accent is bad, just that it's depressing that there's that level of segregation. And so yeah, there's all these factors combining to make her the African American gem. And oh hey, guess what? She's also the violent one, the killer, and the one who's bad at being an activist, who takes it too far. And that is stepping right into a huge pile of shit, because there is a long history in the US, and other places too, but let's talk specifically US, of literally any form of activism undertaken by African Americans gets called going too far. Peaceful protests get declared riots. Riots in response to horrifying injustice and violence get cracked down on massively, where white people can riot over a sports game and by and large get away with it. There's a distinct narrative where black people are seen as being more violent. And the show is playing into that narrative. And that is, I think, at best, poorly thought through on their part. I think it's very plausible that they just weren't thinking, that they designed Bismuth and wrote this plot for Bismuth, and it didn't occur to them that they were playing into some fairly nasty stereotypes. Because I don't think this show is made by the kind of people who would, say, oppose Black Lives Matter. But it's there. And it's a flaw in an otherwise staggeringly good episode. And one that I can only hope they are able to correct with future appearances of Bismuth. I really hope we get those appearances. Alright. At this point, I've said, I think, everything I wanted to say. My phone is blinking at me that it is both almost out of memory space and the low battery warning is on. This is, I believe, the longest response I've ever made. I think the only other things that approach this are cases where I had a reaction and then a response. And I've probably pissed off everyone. So I think I will end the video here. Thanks, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.